arrive at the village bakehouse as dusk settles, the thatch outside blotting the last pale sky, while your hands carry the faint grit of millstone flour and the chill of an autumn evening. A low, peat smoke haze hangs in the room, and your fingertips remember the cool, tacky give of recently mixed dough. A quick note before you settle in. If you like these slow journeys into daily life, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and leave a comment to say where you're listening from. Dim the lights, get comfortable, slow the breath. You push the door and the wooden latch sighs, a soft, lived sound like a hand easing a sleeve aside. The room curves with the oven stone, and soot hold the day's heat like a slow memory. Your shoulders shed a thin layer of chill, and the grit on your palms rubs into the lines of your skin as if the millstone itself has left a signature. A peat smoke tang rides the air, floral and damp, and the light is peeling gold from the low window, catching on flour dust motes that drift like tiny ghosts. You set your basket down on the bench. The wicker breathes faintly of last week's barley straw. The baker glances up, a face softened by steam, and nods the way one nods to someone who has quietly been counted on. You lay a cloth over the unbaked loaves. Damp linen holds warmth and keeps the skins from tightening. Your fingers smooth the dough where it rose unevenly, an unconscious map of the day's labors. A thumb print here, a ridge there. The texture is stubborn and friendly, tacky, elastic, yielding when coaxed. You pat a palm with a dusting of flour, and the sound is a dry, soft scrape against wood. The baker pulls a long wooden peel from the rack, the handle warmed by palms and patience. The oven is still radiating. You press your hand to the stone mouth and feel the residual glow, a gentle heat under the coolness of the evening. A neighbor steps in through the doorway, carrying a small bundle of peat. She settles it on the bench with the same careful motions she uses for newborn lambs. She does not ask for payment. Instead, she passes a tip. How she found the dough stayed airier by letting it rest under a pot of hot water, words traded like a warm spoon. You help tamp the embers back toward the chimney, a careful banking of the fire so the oven will not cool too quickly. The baker hands you an iron scraper. It smells faintly of char and old barley ale, and the metal is pleasantly heavy. You drag the scraper across the oven floor, and the ash flakes fall away in a whisper, leaving the blackened stone exposed like a blank canvas. The scrape makes a soft rhythm against the hush of peat smoke and low conversation, small percussion to steady nerves. Someone tips a bit of warm water into a wooden bowl, and the steam lifts, pooling scent near your face. You breathe it in, chest warming as if someone has laid a soft hand there. You do this often enough that your shoulders remember the motion. Kneel, brush, lift, set each small movement shaping the day's bread. Before the door closes again, you press your thumb into the top of a loaf to test its give, listening for the whisper of resilience that says it has proofed enough. baker reaches for a small knife, his fingers steady and warm from work, and draws a shallow cross into the dough with a motion that is partly practicality and partly habit. The cut breathes for the oven. It lets the loaf know where to open. A child watches from the corner, knees tucked to a straw pallet, eyes reflecting the glow. You let him come closer, just a little, and he hands you a cloth-wrapped, hot stone he'd been warming at the hearth. It is heavy in your palm and radiates a dry, comforting warmth. You tuck it into the top of the basket to keep the loaves cozy as they wait, an improvised haybox of warmth, and the stone's heat will seep slowly into the dough. When you set the basket near the oven mouth, you slide the peel beneath a loaf, feeling the cool wood against your palm and the soft resistance of the dough. The baker counts under his breath. 1, 2 small numbers like stones in a pocket, and together you ease the loaf into the oven. The inside is still warm. The air shimmering the surface of the bread touches the stone with a faint sigh. You close the oven mouth with the flat of the peel for a moment to check the draft, then step back and bank the doorway with a strip of straw-laden cloth so the warmth stays. Outside, the thatch might creak in evening wind inside. The sound is the low keep of people breathing, and the oven ticking like a wide, patient clock. You keep an eye at the oven mouth, not as a nuisance, but as a small stewardship of heat. As the first loaves turn, a thin, bright line of steam slips from a score, and you feel the room change. Air grows a little sweeter and denser, as if someone has woven warmth into the dark. The crust begins to color from straw to amber, then to the deep mahogany that smells of caramel and oak. The baker taps a loaf with fingertips covered in flour. The sound is a muted hollow. If the crumb has set, you mark a loaf with the baker's simple stamp, an indent that names his right to bake here and your right to a share. And then you sweep the peel beneath others, sliding and lifting with the practiced grace of hands that have learned 1,000 small angles. When a batch is drawn, the baker sets loaves onto a wooden shelf, and the aroma expands, gentle and commanding. You wipe your hands on your apron. The cloth takes on a faint streak of soot and bran. A woman from the farther end of the village arrives with a broken cartwheel part and trades it for 2 still warm loaves, practical barter that keeps the village whole. She thanks you with a nod and quickly covers the bread with her shawl to preserve the heat. Nearby, an elder who cannot come every week is given a portion set aside earlier. That afternoon, the baker had kept it under a turned pot near the oven. A simple way to keep bread softer and warmer longer, like a small domestic haybox. Such small economies of care are common here. A loaf lent, a coal saved, a child's chore swapped for an egg. The gestures are brief but precise, and the room feels like a hive where everyone knows their small, necessary task. You lean against the cool back wall, hands resting on the flour-sanded bench, and watch as steam gathers on the oven rim and then dissolves into the room's dim. Your breath comes slower simply by watching, the body's own way of sinking to the evening's pace. Outside, the village sounds thin to a hush. A dog lifts its head, snuffles, and drops it, satisfied. Inside, hands move, peels gliding, bowls clinking. A whisper of measurements given by eye, not by measure. A small laugh escapes the baker when a flour-smeared apprentice misjudges the amount of bran and creates a loaf that looks as if it rolled in a barley field. It's the only bright sound in a room built for low voices. And you smile without meaning to as the second batch bakes. You dust a sieve with bran and shake a little onto a flat of dough, a habit that makes the crust accept the oven's heat without cracking. The sieve's rattle is bright, a tinkling that feeds into the otherwise low register of the room. Someone murmurs that the ale house will have stew tonight. The smell of onion and bone seems to hang outside the doorway. In a corner, a woman mends a child's worn shoe, thumb working the leather with a small needle and a strand of sturdy fiber. She looks up to show how to make the stitch go straight, and then returns to her work, teaching without ceremony. A quiet, mutual aid passing of skill. You watch the way the needle's motion is the same gentle rhythm as kneading, each pull smoothing a surface. As the oven takes its long, steady work, you go about a dozen minor things. Smoothing a cloth over a waiting basket, wiping a bench with a damp rag, tucking the corner of the door cloth into the threshold to stop drafts. The rag is cool and smells faintly of soap. And your motions are small, almost meditative. You adjust your own layers, a woolen outer, a linen undershirt that warms in the press of your skin, and notice how body heat gathers in places where people lean close. A friend hands you a small flask of warm broth. You sip it, and the salt and bone taste anchors you, mild and necessary. There is little waste of these moments. A stirred spoon, a mended strap, a loaf set aside for later. You have the sense that the village's evenings are constructed of these tiny, repeatable acts. The last loaves come out one by one, their crusts singing softly as steam meets the cooler air. You lift a hot loaf on the peel, and the warmth maps against your forearm. A wry thought passes. The loaf looks nobler than it tastes, perhaps, but it will feed more mouths. And you tuck it into the waiting basket. The baker wipes his brow with the back of his flour-dusted sleeve and hums a single, low note that seems to stitch the room together. Someone fetches a curtained box to keep a few loaves for the morrow. Another knots a small piece of linen around a cracked one so it will not dry out. You move among these small maneuvers with a calm attention, checking the crumb by hand, light, springy, warm, and setting loaves to cool on the bench where air will cradle them into their final shape. You pause before leaving, feeling the last warm eddies kiss your wrists. The flour on your palms has turned into a faint paste where oil from your skin met starch. It streaks in little rivers when you rub it with the heel of your hand. You fold the cloth over the baskets, tucking corners like corners of a child's blanket, and the fabric takes on the loamy smell of hearth and grain. The baker slides a last loaf into your hands, not as charity, but as a practical certainty. The village rises early, and breadless bellies are a poor start to a week. You nod, feeling the weight in your arms, and step toward the low doorway. The street outside is cooler. Now the air carries a metallic edge, and the distant bellow of cattle. Thatch rustles above you, as if the roof itself is settling for the night. You press the door cloth into the threshold once more, feeling the resistance of straw and wood, and the draft lessens like a held breath. For a moment, you stand with your nose near the cloth, breathing through the nose, only to keep the cold at bay. And the world shrinks to the small warmth cradled in your hands. You set off along the lane, loaf warm against your belly, feet sinking into the soft mud, and your breath fogging before you. A neighbor lifts a lantern and tips the wick in greeting. You lift your hand in reply. The night closes gently over the thatch, and you carry the slow light of the bakehouse with you, a heat that will return to the village tomorrow soon. You step from the mud into the low light and feel the warmth of other people's fires before you see them. The bakehouse smells of smoke and grain. It smells of hands that have worked the dough all morning, and of the faint, tangy comfort of old sour. Someone taps a wooden peel against the stone, a short, hollow sound, and the room answers with a low shuffle of feet and a quick, relieving laugh. You carry your dough like a small, patient thing cradled in cloth, palms flat to prevent giving it shape with your fingers. Your cloth is damp at the edges, where the warmed dough breathes against linen. It smells faintly of the way you added yesterday to coax a slower, more resilient rise. You move close to the oven, and someone slides aside to let you reach the stone. There is a practiced choreography here. The keeper of embers works with the baker, and the baker with whoever walks in carrying bread for a lord's tax, a neighbor's wedding, or simply for supper. You watch the keeper, a woman with eyes like flint, but a smile that softens when a child toddles in, and you mimic the angle of her wrist as she pushes coals together. The way she banks the fire is small, economical, a slow push to one side, a tucking of ash to make a heat pocket on the far wall where loaves will brown without burning you. Slide the cloth aside and set the dough upon a dusting of coarse flour, feeling the coolness of the stone through the cloth for a heartbeat before the oven's glow returns warmth like a hand. You score the top with a small knife, no flourish, just a crescent, a vent, and steam sighs out where the cut opens as the crust begins to come alive. A neighbor lifts a bread paddle. It is warm at the edge where someone else rested their hand, and you pass the loaf to her with a small word of thanks, which is a ritual as much as a courtesy outside. The sky is a brittle gray that might snow before morning, but inside the bakehouse, the air is a layered thing: smoke, warm flour, the faint sour of kept yeast, and the mineral scent of stone. You tuck a folded rag into a crack At the oven's base, a small, prosaic ceiling of draft that keeps a steady heat. And someone nods, because everyone knows to spare a bit of cloth for the oven. This is the understated mutual aid you expect. No one proclaims generosity. You trade a strip of turf for a measure of grain. You watch a child's small fingers learn how to fold dough. At the kneading benche man, call him Thomas, because names help you remember faces. Brings a parcel of peat. His palms are black with it. And he lays it beside the woodpile, muttering about a stubborn bit that stuck to his boot. He does not need to announce that his peat goes to the oven, but someone says good, and you feel the warmth of not having to barter your hunger alone. You turn the peel and slide, gently, a loaf into the heat pocket. The stone drinks the bread's chill and gives it back as a slow, even bake. A transaction as old as the grain watching gives you a quiet education. How much ash to clear, how long to let the embers sit. The sound a loaf makes when the crust forms, a dull, ripe thud you learn to trust like a metronome. A child hums under his breath, a flat tune that seems to be half a nursery rhyme and half the scrape of a scythe. You find yourself matching the rhythm of your hands to it. Folding, turning, tucking. You tuck a small loaf into a basket lined with straw, haybox thinking. Even for bread, and another neighbor slides in beside you with a water butt warmed by the oven's side, balancing it on his hip like a quiet gift. The warmth of the water makes your hands less stubborn. You cup a little at the surface and feel salt on your skin from the day before when you washed at the river. Someone lifts a lid at the far bench, and a puff of steam and the smell of broth escapes. And you see a woman stirring with a wooden spoon the length of a child's arm. She fishes out a cooled marrow bone and offers it to the child, who has been watching the whole time he bites. And the sound is small and monstrously contented, like someone discovering a hidden joy. You think of the Lord's oven law. How many loaves get carried here, and how many must stay to pay dues? And you fold that thought away like a scrap of cloth, useful and necessary, and not meant to touch the bread you will eat tonight. Heat creases your skin. Where your sleeve has slipped, you wipe your palms on your tunic and leave a pale stripe that looks for a moment like a path across your sleeve. Someone jokes that your stripe makes you look like a car track. It's quiet, soft, and the laugh ripples, but doesn't drown the other sounds. You slide a peel under another loaf and bring it out. The crust is a deep amber with spots the color of honeycomb. And when you tap it, the sound is a small, dry note that sends relief through your shoulders. You cue the loaves on the counter, where they will cool. A woman lays a strip of cloth between hers and yours, and the two breads rest like companions who have taken shelter together. The crumb inside is dense, where you used more whole grain, and lighter, where you slipped in some finer flour for the Lord's portion. Texture is a ledger of choices made beneath your palms. You cut a small heel and hand it to the oldest woman in the room. She closes her eyes when she chews, and the look on her face is a weathered gratitude that requires no words. A child who has watched you work the whole time grabs a torn corner and runs out into the cold. Breath steaming like a small flag, you smile despite the thought that crumbs are a sin in a hungry world. You listen to the rhythms of packing up, the scrape of the wooden scoop, the coiling of rope, the heavy, satisfied thump when a basket is set down. A boy folds a cloth over a kettle and tucks it under straw to keep the stew warm in the same way you tuck bread. The two practices feel like cousins, different languages for the same household need. By the time the last loaves are set, a fine grit of flour dust hangs in the air like very slow snow. Someone waves a hand through it and gives you a smile that transports heat to the tips of your fingers. The keeper marks names in the margin of a ledger with a stub of charcoal, a quick tally of who brought which measure and who owes what to the Lord's steward. The marks are tidy and practical, not accusatory. Your hands smell of yeast and smoke. You raise them to your face and breathe in, and the smell brings a memory of your mother's oven door, which felt like an invitation more than an obligation. A woman pats your shoulder as she passes. Her hand is warm and dry from carrying baskets, and you nod, which is another small currency in a place that counts little gestures. You take the last basket and secure it with a knot that will hold. The rope squeaks, and the sound strikes you as peculiarly modern in its thin insistence. Outside, the wind bites, and you wrap the cloth around the basket's opening, tucking the corners to keep heat near the loaves. The motion is practical and reverential in the same breath. A man meets you at the gate and lifts his hat. His fingers leave small flower prints on the brim, and you both laugh because that is how you announce kin in this place. He carries a small wrapped parcel, cheese whose rind is puckered like a map. Cooled on a sill last night, he offers you a piece, and it tastes of milk and salt, and a summer you do not remember, but that seems to live in the cheese's folds. You split a heel and hand half to him. The exchange is small and matters because, in this village, food walks like currency, and so does goodwill. Your feet are cold when you set out. You tuck them deeper into your boots, and with each step, you feel warmth return like a slow, forgiving tide. You pass by the field where the stubble is rimed with frost. The air is clean, and small birds flit like scraps of paper, catching up on the last of the seeds. When you reach your cottage, the door hinges complain in a tone you recognize, and you prop the basket by the fire because the loaves like to be near warmth until they are cool enough to wrap. You bank the hearth for the night, pat coals into a soft mound, lay a thin plank across to temper the glow, and lay a wet cloth near the opening so the draft does not steal the remaining heat. You wrap the largest loaf tightly in linen, and then in a layer of straw you have learned to treat the bread like a sleeping child, a careful thing that will keep if handled without fuss. A small loaf you call the day's heel is kept on the table for the cat, who rubs against your shin as if to collect tribute. You bend and scratch behind the ear because it reminds you that some comforts are simple and crude, but true. You set a loaf on the windowsill. The pane is thin, and the cold glass firms the crust from below. so that by evening it will have a satisfying chew. As twilight settles, you sweep the floor, straw crumbs make soft patterns, and stack the scrubbed bowls by the hearth to drain. The motion is almost chanting, and your shoulders unbunch with each pass of the broom. You pull off your apron and fold it neatly. It is stained in ways you might not explain to a visitor, and you lay it by the door like a small map of the day's labors. The final light thins, and you put brimful of oats near the stall, so the mare will not wake. Hungry animals wake hunger in different rhythms, and you have learned them all. You make the small bed by the hearth, layer a strip of straw, then a blanket, then another strip of straw for cushion. You have heard of feather beds in the manor, but here straw is honest. And warm you tuck a small heated stone into the fold of your blanket. A practice you learned from an older neighbor. The stone is smooth and warm and holds heat like patience. You lie down, and the cat climbs and curls against your calves. A small weight that steadies the night's breathing. You feel the day's work loosen from your spine. Outside, a dog barks once, and as answered the sound is a punctuation that keeps the village in its place and doesn't trouble you. You breathe nose first, slow and small, a practice your mother taught for sleeping in the cold, so the wind doesn't surprise your lungs. The breath dims your thoughts to a soft glow. There are no promises about the morrow in the way you sleep, only a quiet faith that the loaves stashed by the window will be there in the morning, and that you will rise to a sky that is the color of barley. And then rest. You kneel at the low table, warmed by the hearth, and let your palms map the dough as if it were a small, living thing. The wood smoke rolls soft against the rafters, lingering like a remembered conversation. Your fingers press, fold, and coax air pockets into place. The dough gives, then resists, then yields to the rhythm you have learned by touch. Flour dusts your forearms. It smells faintly of the field and of sun-baked straw. The room is dim but comfortable, a pool of amber light around the hearth where coals glow beneath the kettle. Outside, the air is sharp with river and frost inside. The stones keep a steady, gentle heat that makes the dough breathe. You have used the same motions every time you make bread. Tuck the edges under, lift the mass, turn it, and let it settle. Each small action makes a tiny difference. A tuck here will catch one more whisper of steam in the crust. A firmer press there will close a seam, so the loaf does not unravel in the oven. Your thumbs leave little dimples in the dough, like the topography of your hands, and you find comfort in the repetition. The touch tells you about the day. If the dough is sticky, you think of damp barley. If it is firm, perhaps the miller sifted more bran than usual. Sensory cues are worth more than words in a kitchen lit by hearthlight. When the dough has been formed into rounds, you set them on a board dusted with meal, covering them with a coarse linen. The fabric is rough against your knuckles and smells faintly of smoke and last week's soup. You tuck it over each loaf, pinning warmth like a small blanket over sleeping things. Heat rises from the hearth, and you take a moment to bank the fire. You push the brighter coals to one side, pile the older embers beneath a bit of ash, and lay a flat stone at the edge to hold warmth without flaming. The motion is a careful choreography. Too much fuel, and the oven will overheat. Too little, and the loaves will come out gray and heavy. Banking the fire feels like persuading a temperamental beast to keep you company through the night. The village oven will not be lit for hours, yet you plan around other people's needs. The baker often comes first, then the farmer's wife, then the widow with a pension of grain. You have learned to share oven time like a conversation. Today, the smith's apprentice has left you a note in the mortar, a request for extra heat later, since he will be in the forge and needs the oven to be very hot when he drops his pottery. You nod to the note with a smile and fold the linen tighter. A neighbor will come by at dusk with a sack of chopped peat. You will trade slices of dough for the peat's steady burn. This unspoken exchange of chores and goods is as ordinary as the rising of bread. It is also how a village keeps itself gently moving. You take one loaf to the window and press it to the cold glass to test whether the room is warm enough. The surface is cool under your palm, the glass fogging with a faint ring of warmth where you touch. There's a small ritual to encourage fermentation. You carry the dough to the warmest corner, beside a cluster of warmed stones. Earlier, you heated those stones in the embers, heavy river rocks that retain heat and release it slowly. You wrap one in a scrap of wool and nestle it beside the dough, the stone's dull heat seeping through the cloth and coaxing the yeast into a gentle activity. You pat the cloth to close the gap and watch as the linen draws a light halo over the dough. The cottage smells like hearth and yeast, and the faint floral tang of whatever herbs remain from summer small domestic tools punctuate these movements. A wooden scraper, blackened at the edge, a tin bowl rubbed smooth by years of hands, a flat peel for sliding loaves into cavities of stone. You run your thumb over the peel's handle, remembering how it sat in a neighbor's hand the last time you borrowed their oven. Practical knowledge circulates, just as bread does. Mrs. Tozen taught you a trick for sealing dough with a dampened finger. Old Simon, from the other side of the common, showed you how to judge heat by the color of the embers. These lessons are passed face to face, with a modest hand on an elbow or a quick tilt of the head. They are the village's quiet curriculum. It is late morning when the milkmaid stops by with a single egg under her apron, small and still, with the faint warmth of the hen. You add it to the dough for richness, a little luxury that will make the crumbs softer. The egg's shell is slightly gritty with straw dust when you crack it. The yolk sets golden and firm in the bowl like a tiny sun. You stir it in, watching the dough take on a smoother sheen. No one in the household comments. There is comfort in these small, shared moments that pass without fuss. Outside, a cart creaks past. A slow sound that reminds you the world continues beyond your doorway. in the afternoon. As the sun shifts thin across the fields, you think about insulation. The wind has been prying at your shutters these last few days, and you mop a strip of straw into the gap where the window sashes meet the frame. The straw's scratchy texture seems silly against your fingertips, but pressed tight, it is effective. It blunts the bite of the north wind and keeps the hearth's warmth closer to the dough. You tuck more breadcloths into corners, lay an extra blanket over the cradle, and wrap your own shoulders in a shawl knit by your mother. These small acts, the stuffing of straw, the sealing of woodwork with cloth, are civilian engineering. Simple and pragmatic, they make the interior a calm pocket of warmth. As dusk approaches, the village movement accelerates subtly. The baker returns with soot on his apron, and the smith whistles a note while he cools a horseshoe. You exchange a nod with the man who carries coals. His hands are calloused and glow faintly with heat. He drops a small mesh of embers at your feet for the oven. When the communal oven room opens, there is a quiet choreography. Each household carries its loaves wrapped. Each person waits their turn, sharing knowledge and space without ceremony. The oven is a common heartbeat. When it is hot, everyone brings their wares. You arrive at the oven with your rounds tucked under a cloth, the dough slightly wingspan-shaped from the jostle along the path. The air outside has a thin metallic quality from the coming frost, but the oven room smells of warm stone and the faint caramel of yesterday's baking. The oven man moves with the measured calm of someone who has a relationship with fire. He uses a long rake to smooth the embers, and you watch the ash fall like snowfall onto the floor. He offers a small, practical gesture, a flick of his wrist that pushes a heat-holding stone against your peel, giving it a little extra warmth before you slide the loaves in. You exchange a brief, dry joke about the loaf doing its best to escape the peel, and the fire snickers in the rafters. Humor here is economical, useful as a seasoning. Sliding a loaf into an oven warmed by the day's wood is a special sort of quiet. You slide close and draw back, the motion neat as a curtsy. The oven door closes with a soft seal, and you wait outside in the cool, breathing dusk. Inside, the loaves face the heat. The first hiss of steam is the sound of water leaving dough that will become something both durable and tender. You bank your own small fire back home, folding embers under ash and laying a few planks across to save them for the night. This micro-action, tending two fires, coordinating their moods, is how householders practice thrift. The sound of the village at this hour is domestic and low. Settling shutters, distant lowing of cattle, the soft click of a spindle. You do not stay to watch the oven. Waiting is a quiet exercise of patience that the village cultivates like a crop. Instead, you walk home through narrowing light, carrying a basket of the exchange that peppered your afternoon. A small coil of salt in a worn pouch from the merchant, a handful of herbs from the widow to rub into crusts. There is an understated moment of mutual aid as you pass the smith's door. His apprentice is short on hands, and you pause to tighten a leather strap on a harness for a minute. Your fingers, still smudged with flour, work the leather. The apprentice thanks you with a nod and offers you a sliver of cured meat. That exchange is spare but precise, a lending of muscle for a future loaf. It is how neighbors keep each other sustained, not with sermons, but with practical trade and a shared knowledge of what keeps bodies fed and tools sound back under the eaves of your own cottage. You prepare a spot for cooling. Heat needs to leave the bread at its own speed to set the crust. So you lay a board across the table and fan the loaves with a thin strip of woven reed to coax a steady air through the crumb. The crust responds, changing from the pale of raw dough to the golden brown that speaks of caramelization. It smells nutty and deep, with a whisper of char where the oven's breath met the loaf. You score the tops with a quick slash, a practiced line that helps steam escape and gives the bread its personality. And each cut opens small and defiant, like a secret letting out. You run your finger along the edge, tasting the heat that escapes and the faint grit of flour. The bread sounds slightly hollow when you knock the bottom, a small percussion that tells you the bake was true. There is a patient economy to cooling bread. You must decide when to wrap it and when to leave it to breathe. For this loaf, you let it rest uncovered for a while, the crust firming under the gentle draft from the window. As it cools, the smell fills the room in layers, first yeast and warmth, then the sweet cornness of the grain, then something like browned sugar. Someone knocks at the door. It is the teacher from the neighboring hamlet, carrying a small parcel of acorns. She has come to trade knowledge about an herb that seems to prevent spoilage in the household. In return, she asks for a slice that she can eat on her walk. You cut a wedge and hand it across, the bread still warm against the linen. She bites and closes her eyes with the contemplative look people get when they eat something made carefully. Her small, practical trust, bread for advice, knowledge for food, is another stitch in the net of survival. When evening settles fully, you gather the family together around the table. The candle is small and sputters against the room's cool edges, but the hearth's glow keeps the nearest faces in soft relief. You break the loaf by hand, and the interior is tender with an even crumb, a tiny steam column lifting from the cut as though the bread is exhaling. The sound of crust cracking is domestic and intimate, the slow conversation around it gentle and modulated. You pass slices carefully, mindful of children whose hands are quick and hungry. The taste is wheat and salt and hearth. It fills the mouth with something plain and utterly satisfactory. Eating together is a compact of quiet help. Shares of bread, of heat, of watchfulness through the night. After the meal, you think of preservation. Leftovers must be managed. Stale bread can be repurposed rather than wasted. You wrap some in cloth and hang it from a peg to dry for a future porridge. or to be crumbled into a stew. The crusts make good bedding. For the fowl, the crumbs will be fed to small ones, or used to mend a sauce. Nothing is extravagant here. Reuse is an art learned from necessity and taste. You one-handedly scrub the table with a bit of hemp and water, watching the linen catch crumbs that will be fed back into the household economy. The motions are efficient and rhythmical, the sound of scraping an evening metronome. As the hour deepens, you bank the fire once more. This time you spread the coals thin, letting a last ember live under a bed of ash. You slide a warmed stone into a wool pouch and tuck it into the cradle, and for extra care, under the child's feet while they sleep. The stone's residual heat is gentle and steady. It sleeps like a warm hand on the small feet. You also pass a small tip to your neighbor. A loop of straw tied tight will keep the door from rattling in the night, and they repay you with a quiet of their own by closing their shutters with a softer hand. This pattern of give and take has no fanfare, just the humility of mutual maintenance. Before you settle, one more practical action remains. You dampen a cloth and press it across the oven's cracked seam to keep ashes from finding their way inside the house through the chimney. A simple sealing that stops drafts and keeps the night warmer. The fabric cools quickly, picking up the ambient chill, and you pat it dry with another scrap until it holds only a faint smell of smoke. You fold it away, a small archive of the day's labors, and hang up your working apron where the moths will not ruin it. These closing gestures are small and domestic, but they make the night orderly. You sit for a moment with your hands warmed by the hearth and the heat of the day in your chest. The house exhales slowly, animal, human, and bred. Your breathing finds the same measured pace as the oven's sleep. There is a quiet pride in what has been made, neither bravado nor show, only the satisfaction of something useful. Outside, the thatch creaks in the night wind with an old, steady sound. Inside, the lights are small and the faces are round and full of food and quiet. You feel the weight of the day settle, soft and steady. When you rise to lay out quilts for the night, you do so with practical economy. An extra blanket over the chest, a straw mat fluffed and tucked, a small pile of chopped peat within reach should dawn demand it. You arrange the family to sleep in shifts if the weather looks harsh, the stronger ones staying awake a little longer to feed the embers, while the weakest take their rest first. You pass a small, wry remark about how even sleeping can be a community chore, and the room answers with muffled chuckles that dissolve into the slow rhythm of preparing to sleep. As you tuck in the last child, the house smelling faintly now of bread and wool and peat, you let your hands linger on the blanket in a habit you developed long ago, smoothing, pressing, and leaving a palm warm above their little chest. Your breathing eases into the ordinary pattern of evening. There are no grand proclamations here, only the steady comfort of work done and shared. You close your eyes for a moment to listen. The kettle's quiet drip, the distant lowing settled, the occasional creak of wood, and you think of tomorrow's chores. The miller's timetable, the market, the next batch of dough to be coaxed into life. Your last conscious act is small and sensible. You set a warmed stone on the bench by the door, so it will be there in the morning for the dough, wrapped in a scrap of cloth to keep it clean. The stone's residual heat is a promise that tomorrow will begin with a gentle advantage. Then you move in slow, deliberate steps toward the sleeping hearth. The room narrows to the glow and the hush, and you let your breath follow a softer pace, preparing not to dream of triumph, but to continue tomorrow the simple, faithful work of feeding. Soon your thoughts drift like the last thin smoke up into the rafters, and you think, with an almost amused tenderness, that no one ever really masters bread. It keeps teaching you. You lie down with the warmth gathered about you, and let the steady household sounds fold around your rest. Outside, night settles more completely inside. The leftover heat of the day holds like a hand. You breathe slowly, counting the small satisfactions that might seem ordinary to an uninterested ear, but to you are everything. The wood has done its duty, the dough its work, the village its quiet tending. In the soft half-light, you let sleep begin on a slow, intentional note, and you carry with you the knowledge that when morning returns you will rise to the same small choreography, the same touch, the same shared oven, the same quiet barter of goods and goodwill. And that is enough to keep you going. This thought sits like a warm stone under the linen of your mind as you settle toward sleep, and the rest of the story waits patiently for the next hour. You move more slowly now that the last loaves have left the oven, and the day narrows toward night. The bakehouse is thinner on light. The low sun slips through the smoke-stained lintel and paints the workbench in amber. Heat still hangs in the air like a soft, tired animal. You set each warm loaf on the oak board and feel the crust sing beneath your palms. A dull, pleasant crackle as steam finds small fissures. Your fingers leave pale prints on the flour-dusted surface, and the smell of yeast and caramelized grain fills your nose, sweet and simple. The sort of thing that settles into the bones after a long day. You tap the belly of one loaf with knuckles that still smell faintly of rye and ash. The hollow note reassures you. The crumb has been born. The oven did its work. A thin wisp of steam curls from a scoring line, warm against your face. You move methodically, making the sorts of small checks that keep a household steady. A slice taken now is warm enough to steam on the cut, so you spare a fingertip to press a crumb and test for spring. It yields, then holds. Tiny bits of grain catch between your teeth when you steal the heel, the taste of roasted barley, and a mild, comforting sourness that might have come from a long, slow starter. You take your heel with no ceremony, because bread is a private little blessing, and because the heel will be hardened into toughness by morning, and better for grating into pottage behind you. The oven mouth is a dark, round eye, cooling in broad bands from the throat out. You begin the careful business of banking the fire for the night. The motion is small and exact. With a flat shovel, you gather the coals, coaxing embers to one side so they will not die cold in the dark. You ease a bed of ash over them like a thin blanket. The ash is warm and powdery, a soft gray that mutes the bright orange. Your hands sense the heat even through the wooden handle. As you tamp the coals gently with the back of the shovel, the sparks settle the oven, exhales a long, faint breath of warmth, then grows quieter. You cover the iron door with a dampened rag stuffed with straw, pressing it into the seam with a practiced palm to seal drafts. The clay around the hearth smells faintly of lime and wet earth as you smooth it, and the little huff of evaporating water cools your face. A neighbor from the lane lingers in the doorway, carrying a shallow basket of eggs. The basket swings, and the eggs emit that warm, living scent that farm goods have in the evening. She has stood in line earlier, but her turn came late, and her back was stiff from standing all day. You hand her a still warm cob from the last tray. It is modest, not ornamental, but it weighs welcome in her hands. She offers the eggs, a barter as old as hunger. You take two and tuck them into the pocket of your apron. The exchange is unembellished. She ducks inside to feel the heat on her frozen fingers for a moment, pressing them to the side of the oven with almost theatrical relief, then murmurs a quick thanks and tells you with a soft laugh that the hens are laying fewer eggs because of the damp. You pass on, as you always do, one small practical thing: the recipe for a thicker crust when the fire has been hotter than usual. And she nods, the knowledge taking place like coals settling into ash. This mutual trade of goods and knowledge is as much a part of the village's evening as the curlew's call. Not grand, but steady. There is a basket at your feet with trimmings of saved dough. You fold them into a rough lump, press them flat, and slide them into a small pot with a lid. The pot is heavy, its iron cool from being washed. You heat a stone at the oven's mouth until it sings faintly, then tuck it into a cloth and press it into the pot above the dough. A small, plausible warmth that will keep the scraps from spoiling until breakfast. You could have used the hay box, but this more humble method is quicker and uses less hay. A good cook learns to save both heat and straw in equal measure. The fabric around the stone smells of char and grain when you lift it, and for a moment your fingers remember the heat like a note on a string outside. Someone drums a wooden lid against the wall to call the blacksmith in for supper. The sound is flat and domestic, more like a clock than a summons. You hear children's low voices racing in the distance. The twilight cloaks them in muffled laughter. The light shifts bluely, and you wipe flour from your forehead with the back of your wrist, feeling the grit and the faint tack of sweat. You move to the wash area, where a basin of water has been kept warm near the hearth. You ladle a cupful over your hands, the water heavy and pleasantly scalding, and rub the dough from your knuckles. The tiny beads of dough that cling like memories. The smell of warm grain and wet ash mingles, and you take a breath that is part relief, part readiness to sink into the night. There is a small, practical ritual you always perform to prevent mice from finding the day's goods. You close the bread box with a thin layer of oil-soaked cloth coaxed around the lid's lip. The cloth is slightly tacky to the touch, and as you smooth it, the oil gives off a faint, green-scented sharpness, probably tallow and herbs. You set the loaves in neat rows, crust to crust, the woody bench humming faintly where the residual heat lingers. You tuck the smallest, oddly shaped loaf into a corner for the squire's lad who shares your road. He will fetch it at dusk and carry it home carefully, because to carry bread is to demonstrate gentleness. You think about this for the briefest of moments, about how ordinary kindness looks. It looks like warm bread and shared embers. The village oven is a communal thing. You never quite close it to the world. A man arrives who cannot afford to keep a bake going at his cottage. He stands in the doorway waiting, posture expectant, hands reddened from fieldwork. You gesture to a bench and hand him a small, still warm heel. He lowers his head in thanks. Then he asks quietly if you wouldn't teach his wife how to bank the fire tomorrow. She is new to the village, and the oven frightens her. You show him, with a small demonstration, how to slide the coals to the side and let the ash fall like soft rain, how not to suffocate the heat, but to cradle it until morning. He watches your hands as if they are less familiar language and copies the motions in the air. This passing of craft is an understated form of aid, not charity in a plate, but the giving of skill that keeps people fed. You find a kind of contentment in this. The exchange of knowledge feels like laying boards across a muddy path. As dusk deepens, you begin to tidy the tools. The peel is heavy. When you lift it from the rack, it smells faintly of smoke and flour. You smooth it with a scrap of leather saturated with animal oil, the surface gleaming with a slow, warm sheen. The bench gets a final sweep. Flour motes rise like pale moths and settle against the dark timber. You check the hooks where the dough bowls hang to dry, feeling the grain of the wood with a practiced thumb. The small ritual of ordering tools quiets the mind. It is as restorative as prayer, slower and steadier. There is no triumph here, merely competence. In the corner, an elderly woman sits on a low stool and mends a sack by the fading light. Her fingers move with the economy of years. Each stitch is small, near invisible, but firm. You hand her a thin scrap of cloth for a patch. She accepts it without fuss and tucks it into place with the same calm motion she uses to fold her shawl in the morning. She hums, not loudly. You would not call it singing. It is a simple tune that threads through the room like a ribbon. You listen to it for a minute, and the sound settles you further. Her presence is quiet mutual aid. She may not bring wood or eggs, but she keeps the sacks mended so flour may be kept dry. The village is stitched together by such small hands. The supper hour draws close. You set a pot of thin pottage upon the oven's warmed stone to soften slowly. before you slip it into the haybox. A built box piled with dry straw that holds warmth well. You ladle a cup into a bowl for yourself. The pottage smells of boiled greens and a rind of smoked bacon, its heat carrying the foggy essence of the day's fieldwork. You wrap the pot in a coarse cloth and layer it into the haybox, tucking straw snugly around it. The hay muffles the sound and holds the heat so that the pottage will finish cooking without demanding fuel. It's a careful conservation of warmth and time, a way to let the day's labor continue without the constant presence of flame. The hay smells dry and sweet, like a summer that refuses to leave. You fetch a long-handled ladle and pour a portion of the pottage onto a wedge of warm bread. The bread soaks and yields, the crust giving way to a soft, thirsty interior. You chew slowly, the warm broth and bread telling you the honest truth of hunger eased. You eat with your hands, as hands have a way of doing. The bread catches crumbs on the palm, and the salt of the broth leaves a faint line on your lip. The act is unadorned, the pleasure small and immediate. You share the rest of the pottage with those who remain, a neighbor who dropped by with a broken hoe, the apprentice whose hands smell of tar. And the sharing is quiet, an unremarked weaving of lives outside. The sky grows the deep blue of a kettle left too long on the fire, and then taken off. The last light slips from the window, and the room relinquishes it. You bank the final embers of the oven with the same slow, deliberate care you gave earlier. This time, you leave a small ember bed for the pot that must simmer overnight at the miller's request. He will come early before his grindstone resounds. You wrap the oven door with another cloth and set the iron poker across the threshold, a small bar to keep drafts at bay. The metal is cool and leaves a faint, metallic scent in the air that pairs oddly well with the sweet yeasty child of the household lingers near the bench. Eyes heavy and earnest, you teach him to tuck his toes inward when he sleeps. Another practical rule, because the earthen floor pulls cold up if ankles are bare. He listens, mimicking you with a solemn nod, then pats the loaf he will carry to his father later. You show him the tiny seal you press into the loaf's side, a crescent shape, old as someone's memory, and he copies it with a finger, making a crescent in flour on the bench. The gesture is modest, but important. It keeps identity and comfort small and regular. He grins in a way that is all small teeth and mischief, and you laugh, soft, at his earnestness. The sound is a quiet punctuation before you go to bed. You perform one last bit of work. You place 2 smooth, warmed stones beneath a folded wool blanket at the foot of the family bed. The stones have been heated along the oven's outer wall, warmed to a kindly temperature rather than the searing heat used for the baking itself. You wrap them in cloth to trap the heat and slide them under the straw tick. Lying down later, the stones will feel like a gentle pulse against your calves, a slow, comforting beat. It is not a luxury so much as a practical comfort for cold nights when the earth remembers the summer it lost. The wool smells of lanolin and straw. The stones are faintly smoky. You seal the shutters with a strip of oiled cloth tucked into the seams at the sill. And with a small scraper, you pull a little damp clay into any gap remaining by the door. The cold will come, of course, but you aim to make it a gradual arrival. The draft proofing is an intimate, low-ceremony act. Steady fingers, quick decisions, a soft satisfaction when a cold finger fails to find a path. The room seems to draw itself together. You dampen the hearth cloth and set it over the baking peel. A final softening of edges. As you settle into the small pallet near the oven, you notice the residual warmth on the bench and on your hands. You breathe in the layered scents of the room. Yeast, ash, boiled greens, a hint of oil, the clean tang of clay. Each breath erases a little of the day's sharpness. The sounds of the village thin, a cow lowing across the green, a cartwheel creaking, and then easing away, the distant lock of a gate. Near the window, the moon has come up, pale and steady, and it throws a thin, cool light that contrasts kindly with the amber still clinging to the walls. You lay your head upon a rolled cloak that smells faintly of earth and home. Your muscles unclench as if you have been untying knots you didn't know you held. You practice the soft breathing that has gotten you through many long nights. Inhale through the nose, a warm, measured draft of air. Exhale slowly through pursed lips, letting the breath pull the day's grit out with it. The chest eases. Your breath grows longer. The in-breath cools the small heat of the stones beneath your feet, and the out-breath takes the last of the oven's excitement. With it, a neighbor ducks in to return 2 small knives you lent for scoring the morning loaves. He crosses the room with a caution that is more respect than fear, and leaves the blades on the bench with a single, quiet nod. There is a brief exchange about tomorrow's baking, who will bring malt for the starter, and it is settled with an almost invisible agreement. You trade a final tip on keeping starter alive through a spell of rain, and the man departs, footsteps soft on the path. The exchange is practical. Unadorned, it is the kind of mutual repair that keeps a place functioning. Like mending seams that might otherwise split, you close your eyes. The day's work settles into a low, satisfied hum in your limbs. The weight of bread in the sleep chest of the house feels like a promise kept. Outside, the night gathers, slow and attentive. The hay in the box breathes out a faint, dry scent, and the stones under the blanket keep sending up a mild, consistent warmth that presses like memory into your feet. Your breath lengthens still more, each exhale softer than the last. As your awareness thins, the world compresses to the small, domestic geography of the room. The oven, its ash like a sleeping animal. The bench, a landscape of bowls, and peels the pallet with its stacked blankets. You feel the rise and fall of your own chest, measured and gentle. You are carried by the day's small, sure labors into a quiet place where the body remembers how to rest. The last thing you notice is how the warmth of the bread in the box has cooled, but not disappeared. Like a friend who has said good night and lingered in the doorway, your breath slows further. The room narrows to velvet, sound to distant water, and the weight of the night settles over you in a safe, warming blanket.